I will give you the traditional welcome in my Noongar Whadjuk language. The traditional owners of this land, when they spoke with the Warranjinnagan, that's the spirit. And as they said these words on their welcome, Kaya ngai wangai, ngai jurpachina ngai nyinak, nijabal Noongar Bujo Bananga, Kala Mort Kura Nini, Warkulin, Nijabaman Warranjinnagan, Kaya ngai wangai, Nijabal Kumba Nija. Maraj Barangan, Kurlanga Wartwilling, and Carnival Wangang. As I come to you and tell you about the Aboriginal dreaming track of this land, the Derbil Yurig and the Swan River was the place home of the Wagal, the rainbow serpent. For us it was part of religion, spirituality and culture for thousands of years.
Below a subhuman level, to the murderous atrocities of the past, the ripples of colonisation still affect my people. All the deaths in custody were all supposed to be under a duty of care. No one seems to care. Only the loved ones who have lost a brother, a sister, a father, a mother, a daughter or a son, and still have not had any justice for the breaking of their family unit. The suicide rate is heartbreaking all over the state, as most of these lives were sadly children with no hope for their future. This government still continues to hide the secret genocide. The stolen generation still continues today, with children being forcibly removed in the same exact ways. When will my people have better days? The injustices from the past still continue until present day, under this government legislation and policy way. Traditional owners still being displaced from their lands, now with the government closing of the community. What the bloody hell is going on in my country? They say that history never repeats, but we are still stuck in history under the 1905 Act, the White Australia policy. It's time to think of my people, the first people of this country. Thank you.
This Prime Minister has managed to offend nearly everyone, whether it's Scottish people daring to vote for independence, Irish people celebrating St Pat's Day, Greek people derided for the deficits, Jewish people hurt by gratuitous Nazi and Holocaust references in question time, women who are apparently permanently stuck in the 1950s at home ironing and paying electricity bills, Muslim leaders condemning terrorism who don't really mean it, Indigenous Australians who must be very confused because the Prime Minister has said previously that only Aboriginal people living in remote areas are authentic, but now it's a lifestyle choice. At the same time as he cuts $500 million from Indigenous Affairs. Way to close the gap, Prime Minister. This is the infrastructure Prime Minister who doesn't believe in trains or Australian manufacturing or renewable energy technology, who thinks that climate change is crap, whose government has sacked 1,200 CSIRO scientists, threatened the jobs of 1,700 more researchers if their university deregulation doesn't go through. This is a government that signed a uranium treaty with India that significantly lowers nuclear safeguards. A government that negotiates free trade agreements and this dreadful Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement that's been featured over here that will put Australian jobs at risk and threaten our sovereignty. This is a government that has dramatically expanded live export markets to countries where they don't even respect human rights, let alone animal rights, and where gross violations of the current system are being completely ignored. Mirroring what we can see at the state level on animal welfare, well, we know that the current state government appears to think that recreational hunting on Crown land would be okay.
No way, no way!
No way. This is a government that is tough on terrorism and refugees while cutting more than $7 billion from foreign aid that would address some of the root causes: disadvantage, discrimination and despair. And they're sending Australian troops again to a war in Iraq because that worked out so well last time, which will only make Australians everywhere less safe and boost the Islamic State recruitment drive. We all remember the vilification of Julia Gillard for her no carbon tax pledge. which brought forth such gems as Julia, Ditch the Witch, and other endearing slogans. But don't we also remember Tony Abbott saying before the election, there will be no cuts to health and education and pensions. There will be no cuts to the ABC and SBS. Well, apparently broken promises don't matter when Tony does it. And anyway, if you're going to keep helping your mates at the big end of town with tax breaks, and by ending the mining tax and the carbon price, and if you want to keep torturing refugees in expensive offshore detention centres, I suppose you have to get the money from somewhere, right? Now, Tony Abbott may or may not survive as Prime Minister, but these policies belong to all of the members of the so-called Liberal Party. Whoever is the leader, we need to look at their policies. Do they still ignore the existential crisis of global warming? Are they still trying to dismantle the world's largest network of marine sanctuaries that the former Labor government put in place? Are they still banging the drum of national security and border protection as a cover to deny accountability in government, to persecute vulnerable people, and to take away more of our rights and freedoms? Are public health and education, science, fair working conditions, pensioners, students, the unemployed, low-income earners, people with disabilities, Indigenous Australians, homeless Australians, refugees, the global poor, animal welfare, respect for the UN and the environment, are all of these still expendable under whoever is leading the government? Those are the important questions. I want to thank all of you for coming out today and showing what Australians really think of this hypocritical, shambolic, cruel, cigar-munching embarrassment of a government. Thank you all.
Well said!
And a range of social outcomes too. The more equal societies, the better all of our health is, not just the poorest, but right the way through all groups in society. Fairer societies means healthier lives. And again, the government is ideologically unconcerned by inequality. Tony Abbott in 2013 said, "In the end, we have to be productive and a competitive society. Greater inequality might be inevitable." Well, that's more people in the river. That's more people drowning because of government inaction and ineffectiveness. It's no surprise, probably, that inequality was not mentioned in the intergenerational report once. The governments are clearly not planning on doing anything about it. And similarly, climate change got short shrift too. Climate change is now the biggest threat to health this century. It's widely acknowledged by all international public health agencies through direct effects, for example, through heat waves, extreme weather, and the mental health consequences that occur. But more importantly, through the indirect effects affecting food security, food production, water security, the transmission of diseases, the functioning of ecosystems on which all of our health is dependent. So it's really of concern when the government actually is trying to obstruct national and international action on climate change, which is the biggest determinant of our future health.
So please welcome Mike Ballard, retired member of the AMWU.
Thank you. I was listening to Radio National last year, and it was a breakfast program, and Fran Kelly was interviewing Julie Bishop about the current economic slump and what we're going to do about it. And one of the things she was talking about was the taxes. And Julie said, we should have a mature discussion about our tax systems, and that would include the GST. Okay, so I'm here to contribute to that discussion, that mature discussion. But first I want to establish what it is that wealth is and where it comes from. And to do that, I want to ask you all a question. How much wealth would be produced in May if everyone who depends on wages to make a living went on a general strike from May 1st to May 31st? Zero! That's right, zero wealth would be produced. Now we know where wealth is produced. It's produced by us, and it's produced for wages. Now the second thing we want to know is, how is that wealth divided? And the way we can find out is by looking at something that you can Google. It's Credit Suisse report. It's an annual report of wealth. And in that it shows that the upper 10% of the population own 80% of the wealth that the bottom 90% produce. Okay? This happens all over the world. This is like a systemic thing all over the world, and it happens in Australia too. And the systemic thing is called the wage system. Okay? So what's happening in Australia, and has happened since 1975 when Gough got the royal axe, is that there has been a new ideology come about that's been glommed down by the political establishment, and it's called trickle-down economics. And trickle-down economics is basically says that forget about us producing the wealth. The wealth is actually given to us by the top class, by the upper 10%, the ones who own 80% of the wealth. Now that 80% of the wealth that they own, basically, that's all the companies. The 1% own most of the companies. And they own most of the shares. They own most of their investment real estate. They own most of the government bonds and corporate bonds. That's the wealth that they own, and that's the wealth that the conservatives want to protect. And the way they protect it is through this economic theory called trickle down, which is still extant. If the political establishment still believes you can't raise taxes on business. In fact, you have to cut taxes on business. Now, what happened on the march from the end of the Whitlam era to the present is that this theory took over the political establishment, and the people who produce the wealth, you, the wage workers, you suffered a 15% cut in the amount of wealth that you get from the GDP. And that's borne out by a study that was produced by the ACTU. Okay? So you're producing ever more wealth. Every more wealth is being produced every year. The Australian Bureau of Statistics says that the real wealth of Australia has grown measured as the GDP, the gross domestic product, or more properly, the gross domestic product of labor. It's grown 2 to 3% in real terms since 1975, and yet we can't afford free education like we had in 1975. And yet there are these attacks on people going to the doctor. Now they want to send us a price signal saying that we shouldn't go to the doctor. Okay? Well, this is all a bunch of bull. And the reality is that there's more wealth produced every year, and there's more tax cuts happening for the top 10% all the time. Now, that march from 75 to the present, through the 80s, we had Reagan and Thatcherism. That was basically our product of trickle-down economics. And what happened is that the business tax was 49% in 1986. Okay? Hawke lowered it to 39% in 1988. And then when Howard got in, he lowered it to 30%. And now what's going to happen in July is they're going to lower it to 28.5%. And they're wondering why there's a budget deficit? There's a budget deficit because they're not taxing the people who have the wealth. And they're just not going to, and if you send a message to them, you send them a price signal, like they're trying to send us a price signal. You send them a price signal and say, well, you're not going to be elected. You're not going to be in government if you don't start taxing the wealth of the upper 10%. Now, because it has grown 2 to 3% every year since 75, and according to the intergenerational report, we're going to be producing twice the amount of wealth per capita in 2055 as we do today. So just be aware that what happens all the time is that the conservatives, what they'll do is during a boom is they'll cut taxes for the upper 10%. They'll give them negative gearing, which loses $5 billion to the budget every year. They'll give $4.5 billion a year in tax concessions to the mining capitalists. They'll let tax loopholes galore explode, and you'll lose. The 34% of the multinationals will pay zero tax. and 25% of the top 100 companies on the AXX will pay 0 tax, and the rest of them will fool around and pay about 10% tax. So there's plenty of wealth out there to fund an adequate social wage. There's plenty of money for social housing. There's plenty of wealth. It just needs to be tapped, and that's what we should tell them. We're not going to elect you unless you tap into that wealth.
There's one thing about our retired people, they say it as it is. And they've got years of struggle, so there's a lot to learn from them as well. Well, now the great bit, we go for a stroll through the city. We're still
Stuck in the rest of their Christmas only radio to leave the family a witness.
G'day, Team Australia. Forget about all this nonsense, just go home and vote for me.